The first sign that my wife was cheating wasn't some dramatic late-night phone call or finding lipstick on someone else's shirt. No, it was her cooking lasagna. See, Sam doesn't cook. She's more the takeout every night kind of person, and honestly, I've never complained. So when I walked through the door that Thursday evening, and the smell of garlic and melted cheese hit me, I knew something was off. My first thought? She's guilty of something. Maybe I should have suspected sooner. Maybe I was naive or just too damn comfortable. But no one starts cooking a full-blown Italian meal out of nowhere unless they're hiding something. Hey babe, she called from the kitchen, her voice sounding way too chirpy for someone who had been snapping at me for weeks over every little thing. Dinner's almost ready. Thought I'd surprise you. Surprise me? Sure, I was surprised. But not by the food. Something didn't feel right. There was a tension in the air, a layer of fake cheer plastered over whatever was really going on beneath the surface. I smiled, though. Played along. Sat down at the table like nothing was wrong, even though that pit in my stomach was growing by the second. She came out with 2 plates, setting them down like she was some kind of Stepford wife. I didn't say much, just watched her. The way her hands shook slightly, the forced smile, the way she kept looking at her phone on the counter. That damned phone. She sat across from me, avoiding eye contact, and I knew right then and there. This wasn't about the lasagna. This was about guilt. And whatever she was guilty of, it was going to blow up in our faces soon enough. You okay? I finally asked, stabbing at the lasagna. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? Her laugh was high-pitched, unnatural. I took a bite, chewing slowly. I wasn't sure whether I should confront her then or just wait. Waiting seemed smarter, let her trip up on her own. Let her show me what was really going on without me having to pull it out of her. People get sloppy when they think they're getting away with something. So, I leaned back in my chair, glanced over at her phone, and waited. I didn't have to wait long for things to start unraveling. It was the next morning when I got my first real clue. It was Friday, and Fridays are typically our lazy days. I get up early, make a coffee, and usually Sam stays in bed a bit longer before heading to work. But that morning, as I was sipping my coffee, I heard her phone buzz. It was sitting on the kitchen counter from the night before, and I wasn't going to pick it up, at least not at first. I'm not the paranoid type. I don't snoop through her messages or obsess over every little thing. But the lasagna incident still bothered me, like an itch in the back of my head that wouldn't go away. Something was up, and I was going to find out what. Her phone buzzed again. And again. A part of me told myself not to look, just to leave it alone. But something stronger made me walk over, glance at the screen, and there it was. A message from someone saved as J. The preview of the message just said, "Can't wait to see you later, winky face." I froze. I don't know how long I stood there, staring at that screen, but it felt like time stopped. J, not a name I recognized. Certainly not one of her friends. And what the hell was with that winky face? I stood there, my heart starting to race, debating what to do next. Should I open it? I could feel my pulse in my neck, in my temples, thudding louder with each second that passed. This was it, wasn't it? The moment everything changed. I could sense it, like the air around me was growing heavier with each passing moment. But I didn't open the message. Not yet. Instead, I set the phone down, took a deep breath, and tried to think rationally. Maybe it was nothing. Maybe I was reading into it too much. But in my gut, I knew. You don't send winky faces to people unless something's going on. Something you don't want your husband to know about. I heard footsteps coming down the stairs. Sam appeared in the doorway, still half asleep, rubbing her eyes. "Morning," she mumbled, heading straight for the coffee maker. She hadn't noticed her phone yet. My heart was pounding in my chest, but I kept my face as neutral as I could, playing it cool. "Morning," I said back, watching her out of the corner of my eye. She poured herself a cup of coffee, took a sip, and then finally reached for her phone. Her eyes flicked to the screen, and I saw it, just for a split second, the look of panic that crossed her face. She tried to hide it quickly, but it was too late. I saw it. She knew. And now I knew. She tapped a few buttons, probably deleting the message or clearing the notification, and then set her phone down like nothing had happened. But I wasn't going to let this go. Not now. Everything okay? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Too casual. She glanced up at me, her smile forced. Yeah, why? I shrugged. Just noticed your phone going off a lot this morning. Thought maybe it was something important. She laughed. Oh, no. Just work stuff. You know how it is. I didn't know how it was, actually. Sam never talked much about her work. She worked as a project manager for some marketing firm downtown, but the details were always vague. I didn't pry because, honestly, I figured she was just busy. But now I was starting to wonder what else she wasn't telling me. She grabbed her coffee and headed back upstairs, probably to get ready for work. I stood there, staring at the spot where her phone had been, my mind racing. What now? Was I just supposed to let this slide? Pretend like I didn't see that message? No. Not a chance. I didn't want to act rashly, though. I've always believed in making calculated moves, not acting out of pure emotion. But that didn't mean I wasn't going to get to the bottom of this. I just needed a plan. After she left for work, I started digging. First, I checked her phone again, carefully. I've never been much of a tech guy, but I know enough to get by. She didn't have a password on her phone, which made things easy. I scrolled through her messages, but nothing stood out. No J in her contacts. No obvious signs of infidelity. But that didn't mean much, did it? People who cheat aren't stupid. They know how to cover their tracks. I moved to her social media. Instagram. Facebook. Nothing. Just the usual posts about work or some random meme she thought was funny. But I knew better. Something was off. And that message from Jay was the proof I needed. I just didn't know how deep the rabbit hole went. I needed more. I needed concrete evidence. So I took things a step further. I installed a tracking app on her phone. Nothing crazy, just something that would let me see her location and log any new messages or calls she made. It wasn't exactly legal, but at this point, I didn't care. If she was going to lie to me, I was going to catch her in it. And it didn't take long. That night, after she came home from work, we ate dinner like nothing was wrong. I watched her closely, looking for any signs of guilt. She seemed normal, maybe a little distracted, but nothing out of the ordinary. Still, I knew what I had seen. I knew that something was going on, and soon I would have the proof. After dinner, she went upstairs to take a shower, and I checked my phone. The app had logged a new message from Jay. It wasn't long, just a simple "I'll meet you tomorrow at 7. But it was enough. I felt my blood turn to ice. Meet you tomorrow at 7. Tomorrow was Saturday. We didn't have any plans that I knew of. So who the hell was she meeting? I spent the rest of the night in a daze, barely speaking to her, just waiting for the next day to come. I didn't know what I was going to do yet, but one thing was clear: I was going to follow her. I was going to find out who this Jay was, and I was going to get the answers I deserved. The next day, I told Sam I had plans with some buddies, just a lie to throw her off. She smiled and said she was going to run some errands, maybe do some shopping. But I knew better. At 6:30, she left the house, and I followed. I kept my distance, driving a few cars behind her, watching as she navigated through the city. She wasn't heading toward any of the usual places. No malls, no grocery stores. Instead, she drove to a quiet neighborhood on the other side of town, one I didn't recognize. I parked a block away and watched as she pulled into the driveway of a small, unassuming house. The porch light was on, and standing in the doorway was a man I'd never seen before. Tall. Younger than me. maybe in his early 30s. Dark hair, athletic build. And she walked right up to him, smiling, and kissed him on the lips. My heart felt like it had been ripped out of my chest. This was it. The proof I had been dreading. I had suspected, sure, but seeing it with my own eyes? That was something else entirely. They disappeared inside the house, leaving me sitting there in my car, staring at the empty driveway, trying to process what I had just witnessed. I wanted to kick the door down, drag him out by his collar, and demand answers from both of them. But instead, I stayed put. I needed to think, to plan. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. This was about revenge. Because Sam wasn't just cheating on me. She was about to find out what happens when you betray the wrong guy. I didn't sleep that night. After I saw Sam kiss that guy and waltz right into his house like it was no big deal, I drove home and sat in the living room, staring at the clock on the wall. Time seemed to drag by, each tick reminding me that my life had just hit rock bottom. She was out there with him, probably laughing, probably doing things I didn't even want to imagine. And I was sitting here, like an idiot, waiting for her to come home. Around midnight, I heard the garage door open. Sam had come back. The sound of her footsteps echoed through the hallway as she walked into the living room. She didn't notice me sitting there at first, too busy texting on her phone, no doubt to Jay. I stayed quiet, just watching, waiting. My heart was pounding so hard I thought she might hear it. Finally, she looked up and saw me. "Oh," she said, startled. "You're still up?" "Yeah," I replied, my voice flat. Didn't feel like sleeping. She hesitated for a second, then forced a smile. "Well, you should get some rest. I'm going to head to bed." She turned to leave, but I wasn't going to let her off that easily. "Where were you?" I asked, my voice cutting through the air like a knife. She stopped in her tracks. There was a long pause before she turned back around, her smile faltering. "What do you mean?" "You know exactly what I mean, Sam," I said, standing up from the couch. "Where the hell were you?" Her eyes darted to her phone, then back to me. She was trying to figure out if I knew. If I had seen anything. And for a second, I thought she might just lie again, like she had so many times before. But something in my voice must have told her I wasn't playing games anymore. "I was out," she said, her tone defensive. "Why are you grilling me like this? What's your problem?" "My problem? My problem is that you've been sneaking around with some guy behind my back. That's my problem, Sam." Her face went pale, and she opened her mouth to say something, but no words came out. She looked like a deer caught in headlights, completely frozen. "I followed you," I said, taking a step closer. "I know about him. I saw you with him." "Wait, what?" she finally stammered, her voice shaky. You followed me? Don't play dumb. I saw you kiss him. I watched you go into his house. Don't stand there and act like you don't know what I'm talking about." Her face twisted in a mixture of shock and guilt. I could see her brain scrambling, trying to figure out how to get out of this. She was silent for a few moments, probably weighing her options, deciding if she could still lie her way out of it. But I wasn't giving her a choice. "Who is he?" I demanded. "How long has this been going on?" She backed up a step, eyes wide, as if the intensity of my voice was pushing her away. "Luke, I can explain." "No," I snapped, cutting her off. "No more explanations. No more bullshit. I want the truth, Sam. Right now." She hesitated again, biting her lip, and then her face crumpled. I saw the tears start to well up in her eyes, and for a moment, I thought she might actually be sorry. But the moment passed, and all I felt was rage. It's not what you think," she stammered, wiping at her eyes. "I didn't mean for this to happen." "Didn't mean for what to happen?" I shot back. "You didn't mean to start screwing some random guy while your husband was at home?" She winced at that, and the tears started falling harder. "It wasn't like that," she cried. "I didn't plan this, okay? It just happened. What just happened, Sam? You don't accidentally fall into bed with someone else. She was full on crying now, her face red and blotchy. It's not like I don't love you, she said, her voice breaking. I swear, I didn't want to hurt you. I've been feeling so alone, and he made me feel special again. That hit me like a punch to the gut. Alone? I had been there. Every damn day, I had been there. I worked hard, I provided for us, I did everything I could to make sure she was happy. And this was how she repaid me? By going behind my back and sleeping with some guy who made her feel special? I could feel the anger bubbling up inside me, threatening to explode. But I kept it in check. Barely. So what? I asked coldly. You weren't getting enough attention from me, so you decided to find it somewhere else? Is that it? She shook her head frantically, tears streaming down her face. No, Luke, it's not like that. It's just, things haven't been the same between us lately. You've been so distant, and I didn't know how to fix it. Distant? I repeated, my voice rising. I've been distant? You've been the one sneaking around. You've been lying to my face for God knows how long, and now you're going to try and blame this on me? She flinched, and I could see the guilt etched on her face. She didn't know what to say, didn't know how to dig herself out of this hole. And frankly, I didn't care. How long has this been going on? I demanded again, my fists clenched at my sides. How long, Sam? She looked away, her hands trembling. 6 months, she finally whispered. 6 months. Half a year. Half a year of her lying to me, coming home after seeing him, and acting like nothing was wrong. I felt like I had been punched in the stomach, the wind knocked out of me. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Who is he? She didn't answer. Who the hell is he? I repeated, my voice louder this time. His name's Josh, she said, her voice barely audible. He works at my office. Of course, it was someone from work. It's always someone from work. I should have seen it coming. The late nights, the sudden interest in spending time outside the house, everything made sense now. Are you in love with him? I asked, my voice low but steady. She hesitated. Just for a moment, but it was enough. I don't know, she whispered, her eyes filled with tears. I didn't mean for it to get this far, Luke. I didn't want to hurt you. I felt my jaw tighten, my pulse pounding in my ears. But you did, I said, my voice hard as steel. You hurt me, Sam. You've been hurting me for months, and I didn't even know it. She started sobbing again, covering her face with her hands. I'm sorry, she choked out between sobs. I'm so sorry. But her apology didn't mean anything to me. Not anymore. I didn't care about her tears, her excuses, her regrets. She had made her choice, and now she was going to have to live with it. Get out, I said quietly, my voice cold. She froze, looking up at me through her tears. What? I said, get out, I repeated. Go stay with Josh, or at a hotel, or wherever the hell you want. I don't care. But I can't stand to look at you right now. Her face crumpled again, and for a moment, she just stood there, staring at me in disbelief. Luke, please, she begged, reaching out for me. Let's just talk about this. We can work it out. I stepped back, out of her reach. There's nothing to talk about, I said, my voice ice cold. You've been lying to me for half a year. Sleeping with someone else. This marriage is over, Sam. She shook her head frantically, sobbing even harder now. No, please, Luke. I'll end it with him. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. Please don't throw everything away. But I had already made up my mind. There was no fixing this. No going back. She had shattered everything we had, and no amount of apologies or promises could change that. Get out, I said again, my voice final. She hesitated for a moment longer, then slowly nodded, her shoulders shaking with sobs. She turned and walked upstairs, probably to pack a bag. I stood there, listening to her footsteps, the sound of drawers opening and closing, and I felt nothing. Just numbness. After what felt like an eternity, she came back down with a suitcase in hand, her face red and blotchy from crying. She looked at me one last time, as if hoping I might change my mind. But I didn't. I just stood there, cold and silent, waiting for her to leave. Without another word, she opened the door and walked out. I heard her car start, the sound of the engine fading into the distance, and then there was silence. I sat down on the couch, staring at the empty spot where she had been just moments ago. The house felt eerily quiet now, like all the life had been sucked out of it. But that was fitting, wasn't it? Because everything I thought I knew, everything I thought we had, was gone. But one thing was clear. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Sam left that night, but I didn't feel any relief. The house was silent, too still, like the air had thickened, suffocating me. I sat on the couch, the image of her kissing that guy playing over and over in my head like some kind of sick movie reel. I wasn't angry anymore, I was something else entirely. Numb, maybe. But beneath that numbness, there was something darker brewing. I couldn't let this go. Not yet. She wasn't going to walk out of our life together and just, what? Go be with him? Pick up where they left off? No, I wasn't about to let her skip off into the sunset with no consequences. If she wanted to destroy everything we had, she was going to feel the fallout. I wasn't sure where to start, but I knew I had to hit her where it hurt. And it wasn't just about me anymore, it was about sending a message. You don't get to betray someone like this and walk away clean. No, I was going to make sure her life unraveled the same way mine had. And I wasn't going to do it in some loud, dramatic way that she could use against me. No. I was going to be smart about this. Methodical. First thing I did was freeze the joint account. Sam and I shared one bank account for most of our bills, and I knew she'd be relying on it now that she was out of the house. I logged into our online banking, transferred all the money to my personal account, and left the joint one dry. If she was going to try and run off with her lover, she'd need to figure out how to fund her little adventure without my help. It didn't take long for her to notice. The next morning, I got a text from her, short and to the point. What the hell is going on with the bank account? I ignored it. An hour later, another one came. I can't pay for anything. Did you freeze the account? Still ignored it. About 2 hours after that, my phone rang. It was Sam, and I stared at her name flashing on the screen for a moment before answering. Luke, she said, her voice already edging toward frantic. What are you doing? Why did you freeze the account? I didn't freeze it, I replied calmly, leaning back on the couch. I just transferred the money. You don't need access to that anymore. Her voice faltered. What do you mean I don't need access? We have bills. I need to buy food. I have things to take care of. Not my problem, Sam. She was silent for a beat, then her voice hardened. This is ridiculous. You can't just cut me off. I smiled to myself. Watch me. She let out a frustrated sigh, probably pacing wherever she was. You're being childish, Luke. We need to talk about this like adults. Adults? I laughed bitterly. You think sneaking around behind my back was an adult thing to do? That's not what I meant, she snapped, her voice rising. I told you I'm sorry. I'm trying to fix this. I wasn't having any of it. There's nothing to fix, Sam. You broke it. She started to say something else, but I hung up before she could get the words out. I wasn't interested in listening to her excuses anymore. I was done. If she wanted to keep texting or calling, that was on her. I'd blocked her on every platform by noon, and after that, it was radio silence from me. She could talk to my lawyer if she needed anything. The next step was making sure she didn't get any of the comforts of the life we'd built together. The house was mine, legally speaking. I had purchased it before we were married, and I was listed as the sole owner on the deed. She'd have no claim to it in the divorce, which I knew she wasn't expecting. Sam never cared about the details when it came to finances or property. She just assumed we'd share everything, as if nothing could ever go wrong. I wanted her to feel the weight of losing that safety net. The life we built, the home we created, it wasn't hers anymore. She'd have to start over from scratch. I started by changing the locks. It wasn't like she'd tried coming back, but I wasn't going to risk it. I called a locksmith the same day she left and had every lock replaced. When I came back home, turning the key in the new lock gave me a sense of satisfaction that I hadn't felt in days. One small victory in the mess she'd created. I moved all of her things into the spare bedroom. At first, I thought about packing it all up and dropping it off wherever she was staying, but that felt too easy for her. Instead, I shoved everything into the guest room, out of sight but still in the house. If she wanted it back, she'd have to come and get it herself. The clothes, the books, the pictures, all of it was now relegated to the room where we stored junk, like her presence in my life was now just another pile of crap that I didn't want to deal with. That wasn't enough, though. I needed more. Something bigger. I started thinking about her social life. The friends she had made over the years, the people she'd bragged to about our relationship, the ones who always called her the lucky one for landing a guy like me. I was sure they didn't know about her affair. She wasn't that bold. Sam was the type to play the perfect wife in public, keeping her dirty little secrets hidden. But I wasn't going to let her live that lie anymore. I spent the next day combing through her social media, looking for the right targets. Her closest friends, her family, even some of the people we used to hang out with as a couple. I wasn't planning on airing everything out publicly, no, I wanted this to be personal. I started with her best friend, Carly. I'd never liked Carly much. She was a bit too high maintenance, always thinking she knew best, always up in Sam's ear about how to live her best life. I figured if anyone was going to be on Sam's side, it would be her. But she deserved to know who her best friend really was. I crafted the message carefully. I wasn't going to go off the rails, no ranting or raving like some crazy husband. Just facts, laid out clear as day. I included screenshots of the texts between Sam and her lover, pictures I had managed to pull off her phone before I handed it back to her. A neat little package of betrayal, gift wrapped in cold hard truth. The message went out to Carly first. Then a few others, her sister, her work colleagues. People who thought they knew her. People who probably thought I was the bad guy in all of this, judging by the way Sam had been crying victim over the past few months. Well, I wasn't the bad guy anymore. I was the one pulling back the curtain on the life she was pretending to live. It didn't take long for the replies to start coming in. Carly responded first, her message dripping with shock and anger. I had no idea she was doing this, she wrote. I'm so sorry, Luke. She's been lying to me, too. I can't believe her. One by one, the responses rolled in. Some of them shocked, some of them sympathetic, but all of them turned against her. And that was the point. Sam wasn't going to walk away from this with her reputation intact. She had burned me, and I was going to make sure she felt the heat. But I didn't stop there. Sam had always prided herself on her job. She worked her way up over the years, climbing the corporate ladder like it was her personal Everest. She'd bragged about her promotions, her raises, how she was becoming one of the key players at her marketing firm. Her career was the one thing she always valued more than anything else, even more than our marriage, I realized now. And I knew exactly how to rip that away from her, too. I had everything I needed, those text messages between her and her lover, the ones where they joked about sneaking around at work, meeting in the office after hours. It was all there, and it wasn't just embarrassing for her, it was a violation of her company's code of conduct. Workplace relationships were a no-go, especially between someone in her position and some junior employee, which is exactly what this Josh guy was. It took me a few minutes to draft the email. I sent it directly to her HR department, attaching the messages and photos for good measure. I didn't bother with an explanation. The evidence spoke for itself. I wasn't going to get a response, obviously, but that wasn't the point. The point was that Sam's job, her career, everything she thought made her special, it was hanging by a thread, and I had just cut the string. By the time I was done, it was almost midnight. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the wall, feeling both satisfied and strangely empty. I had taken everything from her, her money, her reputation, her job. I had made sure she felt the same loss I did, maybe even worse. But the emptiness lingered. Because even though I had ruined her life, my own was still in shambles. Nothing could undo what she had done. Nothing could make me forget how she betrayed me. But this was just the beginning. I had taken care of Sam. Now it was time to deal with the other man. Taking Sam down was only the first half of the plan. Josh, her little office fling, was still out there, living his life, probably feeling smug about it all. Maybe he thought he'd gotten one over on me. I'm sure in his mind, he'd taken something that belonged to me and gotten away with it. But he hadn't counted on the fact that I wasn't the kind of man to sit quietly and lick my wounds. No, if Sam had shown me anything, it was that people like them don't get to walk away unscathed. Josh was next on the list, and I was going to make sure he regretted every moment he'd spent with my wife. I spent a few days digging into his life. I knew the basics already, thanks to Sam's texts. I had his full name, his work position, and even some of his personal info that she had shared. But I needed more. I needed to know what would hurt him the most, what his weak spots were, where to hit him so it would really hurt. It didn't take long to get what I needed. A quick search of his social media profiles gave me enough to start. He wasn't exactly careful online. His Instagram was full of selfies at the gym, pictures of him partying with friends, and, of course, several shots of him and Sam that I had never seen before. They were subtle, nothing too obvious, but now that I knew, I could see it. The way they stood close together, the way she was always smiling just a little too brightly around him. I also found out that Josh wasn't just some random junior employee. He was aiming for more, trying to climb the ladder just like Sam had. Apparently, he was in line for a big promotion at work. Perfect. I could use that. I started by reaching out to a guy I knew, a private investigator named Greg who had helped me with some legal issues in the past. Greg was good at finding things that people didn't want to be found. I gave him Josh's details and told him to dig. I wanted everything: background, financials, any skeletons hiding in the closet. If Josh had so much as stolen a candy bar when he was 10, I wanted to know about it. Greg worked fast. Within 2 days, he had everything I needed. Turns out, Josh wasn't as squeaky clean as he liked to pretend. His social media painted a picture of a guy living the dream, but behind the scenes? He was a mess. Credit card debt up to his neck, bounce checks, even some dodgy tax stuff that would probably land him in hot water if the right people found out. And then there was the kicker: Josh had a little habit of gambling. Not enough to be in serious debt, but enough that it could ruin his chances for that big promotion he was chasing. I didn't care about the gambling, though. That wasn't my angle. My real focus was the fact that Josh had a reputation at work for being a good guy, someone people trusted. But his financial issues painted a different picture, one of a guy who couldn't keep his life together. I knew if I could get that out into the open, it would destroy any chances he had of moving up in the company. I called Greg again. I need you to leak this stuff, I told him. Anonymously. Make sure it gets to the right people, his boss, maybe some of his colleagues. Greg didn't ask questions, just did what he was paid to do. A couple of days later, I got word that Josh's financial mess had started circulating around his office. It wasn't public yet, but the rumor mill was spinning, and it wouldn't be long before it hit the higher-ups. I wasn't finished, though. That was just the groundwork. The next part of my plan was more personal. I knew where Josh lived. Sam had mentioned his apartment a couple of times in her messages, and Greg had confirmed the address. It was a shitty place, run down and tucked away in a neighborhood that had seen better days. I guess when you're drowning in debt, you don't get to be picky about where you live. I drove over there one night, parking a few streets away so no one would see my car. It was late, around midnight, and the street was quiet. I wasn't planning on doing anything drastic. No violence, no breaking in. That wasn't my style. I had something more creative in mind. I got out of the car, walked down the street, and approached his apartment building. It was one of those old, ugly places with peeling paint and broken lights. Perfect. I had brought a can of spray paint with me, bright red. The kind of red that would be impossible to ignore. Standing in front of his door, I took a deep breath and started spraying. I didn't write anything long or detailed. Just 3 big, bold words across the front of his door: cheating homewrecker. I smiled as I stepped back to admire my work. It was crude, sure, but effective. Anyone who walked by would see it, and I knew Josh wasn't the type to handle that kind of public embarrassment well. He'd be humiliated, forced to face the fact that people knew what he'd done. I left without a second thought, feeling more satisfied than I had in weeks. It wasn't much, but it was enough to send a message. Josh wasn't going to get away with this. The final phase of my plan was more long-term. I had to think bigger, had to make sure that Josh didn't just lose his promotion or get embarrassed in his shitty apartment. I wanted him to lose everything, the same way I had. I called up Greg one last time. "Can you get me access to his phone?" Greg hesitated for a moment, then agreed. A few days later, he sent me everything. Josh's messages, his emails, even his browsing history. I spent hours going through it all, looking for anything I could use. Most of it was just the usual crap: texts to friends, work emails, nothing special. But then I found it. A text thread between Josh and a woman named Rachel. Not Sam. Someone else. Turns out, Josh had been cheating on Sam, too. I couldn't believe it at first. Here he was, playing the knight in shining armor to my wife, and he was off screwing around with someone else behind her back. The irony was almost too good to be true. I wasn't going to keep that little tidbit to myself. No, this was the perfect tool to really drive the knife in. I started by printing out the texts. All of them. Every message between Josh and Rachel, detailing their meetups, their late-night talks, their plans to get together behind Sam's back. I put them in an envelope, sealed it, and addressed it to Sam. But I didn't stop there. I sent another copy to Josh's boss, just to make sure the guy's personal life was exposed to the people he needed to impress. And for good measure, I sent one to Rachel herself, with a little note that simply said, "Thought you should know what Josh has been up to." It was a calculated move. Sam would be devastated again, but at this point, I didn't care. She had destroyed our marriage, and if I had to burn everything to the ground to feel whole again, so be it. As for Josh? Well, his life was about to go up in flames. The fallout didn't take long. A week after I sent the envelopes, I heard from Greg again. Josh had been called into a meeting at work, where his boss confronted him about the rumors and his financial situation. The promotion he had been chasing was gone, just like that. But that wasn't the worst part. Greg told me that the texts between Josh and Rachel had started circulating among his colleagues, too. The guy's reputation was in tatters, his professional life ruined. But the real cherry on top? Sam. She called me a few days after receiving the envelope, her voice shaky and broken. "Luke," she said, her tone thick with tears. "Why did you send me those texts? Why did you do this? Why?" I replied calmly. "Because you deserve to know the truth. The man you threw our marriage away for was cheating on you, too." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear her trying to hold back more sobs. "You're a monster," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "You ruined my life." I didn't flinch. "You ruined your own life, Sam. All I did was make sure you saw the consequences of your choices." I hung up before she could respond, feeling a strange sense of closure wash over me. For the first time in months, I felt like I had taken control of my life again. Josh's life was in ruins. Sam's was, too. And while that didn't fix what they had done to me, it was enough to know that they were suffering just as much as I had. A few days after I'd made sure Josh's life was in shambles, I was sitting at home, drinking a beer, flipping through channels on TV without really watching anything. I'd taken care of everything I needed to. Sam was out of my life, and I'd crushed Josh as thoroughly as I could. You'd think I'd feel some kind of victory, right? But the truth is, when you're alone in a quiet house, the revenge doesn't taste as sweet as you thought it would. I'd ruined their lives, yeah. But it hadn't fixed mine. That was a reality I'd been trying to avoid for days, but there it was, staring me in the face every night in this empty house. Then, out of nowhere, Sam called. I hadn't heard from her since she'd called me crying about the texts between Josh and his other girl. Part of me didn't even want to answer, but something else, maybe curiosity, made me pick up the phone. Luke, she said, her voice quiet but calm this time. No tears, no frantic energy. Just cold. We need to talk. I stayed silent for a moment, trying to figure out what she could possibly want now. We were done. There was nothing left to say. What's there to talk about, Sam? I finally asked, leaning back in my chair. I need closure. We need to figure out how to move forward. This can't just end like this. I almost laughed. Closure? Was that what she thought this was about? But I held back. Maybe this was the final conversation I needed too. Something to officially close the book on this mess. Fine, I said after a beat. Where do you want to meet? She suggested a cafe downtown, the one we used to go to when we first started dating. I hadn't been there in years, and the idea of sitting across from her in that place, pretending like everything wasn't completely destroyed, made me want to puke. But I agreed. I needed to look her in the eyes one last time. The next day, I drove down to the cafe, my stomach in knots the whole way. I parked a few blocks away and walked the rest of the way, thinking maybe the fresh air would help calm my nerves. It didn't. By the time I pushed open the door to the cafe, I was tense, my jaw tight, ready for whatever this conversation was going to be. Sam was already sitting at a small table in the back, nursing a cup of coffee. She looked different, tired, worn down, like the weight of everything had finally settled on her. Good, I thought. She deserved to feel that. I approached the table, and she looked up, her eyes meeting mine for the first time in weeks. There was no smile, no greeting, just silence. I sat down across from her, folding my arms over my chest. So, I said, what do you want to talk about? She took a deep breath, her hands wrapped around her cup like it was the only thing keeping her grounded. I'm not here to fight, she said quietly. I'm not here to make excuses either. I need to know if there's any part of you that can forgive me. That was the last thing I expected her to say. I'd thought she wanted to talk about logistics, divorce papers, maybe how we were going to split things up. But forgiveness? That wasn't on the table. Not after everything she'd done. Forgive you? I repeated, leaning forward slightly. For what? For cheating on me for months? For lying to my face every day? For making me feel like an idiot while you were off with him? What exactly am I supposed to forgive, Sam? She winced at my words, but she didn't back down. I know I hurt you, she said, her voice cracking a little. I know I did the worst thing I could possibly do to you. But I never stopped loving you, Luke. Not really. I almost laughed in her face. Love? You think this is love? She shook her head, her eyes downcast. I don't know. I don't know what it was. I was lonely. I don't have an excuse, okay? I messed up. I made the biggest mistake of my life. Biggest mistake? I shot back. You didn't make a mistake, Sam. This wasn't a one-time thing. You were with him for 6 months. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Every day, you chose to lie to me. To betray me. Her eyes filled with tears again, but I wasn't moved this time. I'd seen enough of her tears to know they didn't mean anything anymore. I'm not asking for us to get back together, she whispered. I know that's impossible. I need to know if we can ever be okay again. If you can ever look at me without hating me. I stared at her, feeling the weight of everything we'd been through pressing down on me. Could I forgive her? Could I ever look at her and not feel that white-hot anger burning inside me? The truth was, I didn't know. And I wasn't sure I wanted to find out. You want to know if I can forgive you, I said slowly, but you haven't even told me the whole truth yet, have you? Her brow furrowed. What do you mean? I mean, did you love him, Sam? Do you love Josh? She looked away, wiping at her eyes. I don't know. I thought maybe I did, but, after everything, I realized it was just a distraction. It wasn't real. It was never going to last. Right, I muttered. So you destroyed our marriage for a fling. She flinched at that, but I didn't care. I wasn't pulling punches anymore. She had to live with the reality of what she'd done, just like I did. Luke, I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said, her voice trembling. But I'm asking you to find it in your heart to let go of the hate. We shared 8 years together. That has to mean something. Those 8 years. The good times, the vacations, the nights we spent laughing on the couch, the times I thought we were building something real. They flashed through my mind, and for a second, I almost felt the pull of nostalgia. Almost. But then I remembered how it all ended. The lies. The betrayal. And I knew there was no going back. Those years are gone, Sam, I said, my voice hard. You threw them away. You chose him over me. You chose lies over the life we built. There's no fixing that. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks now. I know. We sat in silence for a long time, neither of us knowing what to say next. There wasn't much left to say. The marriage was dead, and all we were doing was picking through the ashes, trying to make sense of what had happened. Finally, Sam spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. What now? Now? I echoed. Now, we get a divorce. We split everything up, and we go our separate ways. You can do whatever you want, and I'll do the same. She nodded slowly, but I could see the pain in her eyes. Maybe she hadn't fully accepted that it was over until that moment. Maybe part of her still thought there was a way to salvage something. But there wasn't. Luke, she said after a long pause, I want you to be happy. I know that sounds ridiculous coming from me, but I hope you find someone who makes you happy. I stared at her, not sure how to respond to that. It did sound ridiculous, and part of me wanted to tell her to save her fake well wishes. But another part of me, maybe a deeper, quieter part, knew that she meant it. Whatever had happened between us, whatever lies and betrayals had torn us apart, I believed she genuinely hoped I'd move on. I will, I finally said, my voice steady. And I hope you do too. She blinked, looking surprised. You mean that? Yeah, I nodded. But that doesn't mean I forgive you, Sam. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She swallowed hard, her face pale and tired. I understand. We sat there a little longer, sipping our coffee in silence. Two people who had once been everything to each other, now nothing more than strangers sharing a table. When the silence became too much, I stood up, grabbed my jacket, and looked down at her one last time. I'll have my lawyer send you the divorce papers, I said. She nodded, not looking up at me. Okay. And with that, I walked out of the cafe, leaving Sam behind for good. Driving home, I felt lighter, like a weight had been lifted off my chest. Maybe it wasn't the closure Sam had been looking for, but it was enough for me. I had said what I needed to say. There was nothing left between us now, just paperwork and memories that didn't mean much anymore. I'd spent weeks planning my revenge, tearing down the life Sam had built with Josh. But now that it was over, I realized something: revenge didn't heal the wounds. It just left you standing in the wreckage, wondering what to do next. But at least now, I was free to figure that out. I wish I could tell you that after I walked out of that cafe, everything fell into place. That I somehow felt a wave of peace wash over me, like in the movies where the guy moves on after a heart-wrenching conversation and starts a new chapter of his life with a fresh perspective. But life isn't a movie, and real endings aren't as clean as that. They're messy, jagged things, and all you can do is find a way to make sense of the pieces. The next morning, I woke up in the same quiet house I'd been living in since Sam left, but something was different. It wasn't the kind of change that hits you all at once. More like a shift, a subtle nudge that made me realize the silence wasn't suffocating anymore. It wasn't comforting, either, it just was. The revenge had been carried out. The plans I'd so carefully made, the moves I'd plotted, were done. And now, I was left to figure out where to go from here. The first thing I did was call my lawyer.